It's 7:32, which seems to be the time that we start all of our meetings. Um, and I call this meeting of the Finance and Budget Committee together. Um, so if nobody objects, I'm going to change the order. That's good because Patrick's here. Um, and so we have Bobby and Patrick Keene from Public Works just joined us. So Bobby can possibly get over to the ethics committee, which he's here for instead of at the ethics board. Um, there's been some significant changes since when we voted on the sump pump resolution. And I'm going to try and paraphrase some of the things. If you watch the first part of the public health and safety, which I recommended, like the first 15 minutes between Patrick's explanation and David Bain's explanation, they did a really good job explaining some of the changes. But for the most part, the various committees made certain recommendations to the commission. I know the recommendations that I made were all implemented. They also have written in that there will be a financial aid package to be determined by the commission on a case-by-case basis, which answers that. The exact thing they'll figure out in the first couple of months when they're getting responses. The other thing is that there is a clause now in there because we anticipate that this will operate in a certain way. And, you know, we know who Ed Gentile is. We know who is currently on the sewer commission. But should that change, the RTM now has a clause that it can modify the ordinance or modify or pull it if we need to. Bobby, do you want to explain that a little bit better than I have?
Could we hold on a second? I feel like I can hear Jim Cameron in the background.
Someone needs to mute.
Yes, all good. I'm going to start recording. Hold on.
Okay. Recording in progress.
Oh, I know what it is, Doug. You're at 2.
Okay. I would like to call to order.
I'm going to mute you on ours. Okay? Mute ours, and when we need you to vote or ask a question, you can come back on. Doug is actually he's on the ethics, and they're doing he's attending 2 meetings at once. So that was what it is. So as long as he's muted here, he can participate on the other. All right. So now I'm back to Bobby. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jack. I was getting a little bit of the static feedback there, but I think your question was to sort of summarize the changes we've done to the ordinance and the resolution, the regulations over the past 2 months.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So back in primarily in February, when we were going through meeting with the various RTM committees, we heard a lot of what I would call similar complaints about sort of vagueness in the terms, about how this program was going to be governed, the purpose of it. And one thing I've kind of honed on in every meeting is that at this point, this is really an information gathering program. It's not meant to be prohibitive or punitive. The goal here is to get as much information as possible. And I think a lot of RTM members raised valid concerns about what information are you trying to gather here, and what benefit, so to say, does it serve to residents to be cooperative and responsive to this program. So one of the major changes we made in the regulations that the Sewer Commission adopted, the revised regulations, was to adopt a safe harbor provision. And what that means is that if you receive a compliance statement regarding sump pump discharges on your property, and you voluntarily disclose to DPW, to the Superintendent of Sewer Services, that you have a sump pump discharge connected to the sanitary sewer system, you will be given safe harbor, which is a minimum period of 6 months, wherein you will be in correspondence and work with Ed Gentile and DPW to try and find a way to properly remediate or rectify the discharge. And that can be extended. It is not like 6 months end. You have to do something XYZ. Ed has acknowledged in a few different meetings that with some properties, there's going to be unique circumstances involved, maybe particularly difficult in some cases to find a proper outlet for water that is inside of a basement, so to say, or anywhere else on the property. So there will be sort of a case-by-case analysis of how sump pump discharges are affecting each property. And this will really be an avenue for DPW and each resident who has an illicit discharge or a sump pump discharge to sort of coordinate and work out a plan. The regulations have also incorporated a provision about providing financial assistance to certain residents to help with the cost, to offset the cost that may come with discharge. One of the big topics that we spoke about at PHNS last week was that the Sewer Commission is still working on what they want their financial assistance policy to be. I can tell you that we are working on a draft, and that this is something that the Sewer Commission intends to address at its next meeting in April, which will be before the RTM votes. But I think also, as Ed, I think hopefully made clear at the last meeting, this isn't really necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution. Each property is going to be unique. The analogy I keep using is like a blighted property. The town has a blight ordinance to address blight and remediate blight. But I can tell you firsthand that when dealing with blighted properties, it's not like you can just slap one solution on every property and have it work for all. It's going to be unique depending on what the situation, the context, the layout of the land is. So at this point, again, information gathering, the goal here is to cast a wide net, get as many people as possible to hopefully respond. And that's really the point of the fines here. A $250 fine is not enough that it is going to be extremely punitive. It's not enough to rack up fines or to risk major assets. It's enough so that you don't just throw the statement in the trash and think you don't have to worry about it. It's enough to incentivize you to respond. And that's really it. Now, those are changes to the regulations. The substance of the program is in the regulations. The ordinance that we are asking the RTM to adopt here is really just about incorporating a fine system, a citation system to those regulations, to be able to fine residents if they are not in compliance, if they are not returning those statements. Again, relatively low financial or monetary bar here. If you don't return your statement in time, or if you lie on your statement, it's a $250 fine. And that's really it. To get the information back so that DPW can determine the scope of the actual problem here, how many people have discharges into the sanitary sewer system, what volume it is, what problems that would happen if they were to disconnect and reroute somewhere else, and the ability to adapt and incorporate unique solutions on a per property basis. Changes to the ordinance, I think, as Jack touched on a few minutes ago, is to put in a new clause called the limitation on delegated enforcement authority. In a nutshell, what this new clause does is if the Sewer Commission wants to further revise its regulations in any way that would affect the fines involved or would affect the ability to access residential property, Sewer Commission is required to send notice to RTM Rules Committee of the changes and 60 days in advance of implementation. And really that's to give the RTM a chance to weigh in if they would like to. But it's also important to remember that this is not like a one-shot deal where you have to take it up within that 60 days. It's more to give you notice of those changes. But the RTM at any time can do whatever it likes with this ordinance, revise, change it. So that's not a time limitation on the RTM. That's just a notice requirement.
Patrick, do you want to add anything to that? Because I am going to ask you to add a couple of other things later.
I was just going to point out, and Bobby, correct me if I've got this wrong, that Sewer Commission has the power to invoke certain fines for violating existing regulations. What they don't have the power to do is to fine sewer users for not returning a survey or an affidavit. So do I have that right, Bobby?
Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So what the point of this ordinance is to, in effect, borrow the town's the town can invoke or fine folks for not providing information and for not doing certain activities. So what the Sewer Commission is in effect being provided is the ability to use the town's ability to invoke a fine for not getting the surveys back. I mean, there's a broader issue. I'm happy to go into it if you want me to, Jack, but it's basically, we haven't been able, the sewer commission has not been able to get all the information, in fact, very little information from the sewer users. And so this is meant to be a very small stick, if you will, to try and get folks to return those surveys so we know who has a sump pump connected to the sanitary sewer system and who doesn't.
And I'm going to add two things to that. Number one, part of what that discussion that Bobby just had is the town is lending its authority to the sewer commission, essentially to be able to fine if you don't respond to a survey or a piece of paper. If the RTM feels that they're not doing what we intended them to do, the RTM can modify the ordinance or can kill the ordinance. So, because we're not just blanketly giving our authority over to somebody else, but we're doing it because we believe this is a good thing to do. I'm also going to start with something else. It's a very simple comment. State law states that it is against state law to put clean water sump pump discharge into a sewer system. So this isn't Darien coming up with this. This has been state law for a while. And so plumbers should, licensed plumbers should know this. People who deal with sump pumps are fully aware of this. And if in fact they did something that they weren't supposed to do, that people should discuss with their attorney of whether or not they want to have them pay for it. But, I'm not suggesting anything other than we are just enforcing a state law. We're not creating a new one. And that's the tail result of this, is to get the information so we can determine what we have, but it's also to determine who potentially is violating the state law that already exists and has existed for some time. So I want to make that clear. Also, for anybody who listened to the public health and safety, there are a couple people who suggested that we should wait with this until we finish the I&I. But this is at this stage, since the I&I is about 2/3 done, we're going to be dealing with part of that in the next resolution. There's no reason. We know that some pumps are illegally discharging into our system. There is no reason at this time to wait another 2 years before we implement this. And while I understand everybody needs to think of the minority people that may have to do a modification, we also have to think of the majority that's paying for people that are illegally doing things. And the analogy that I make is my old BMW does 180 miles an hour on that car. I've had it for some time. So does that mean I can drive around town at 180 miles an hour and all the rest of you in town will pay for my tickets? I mean, it's illegal. And it's time that we start thinking about the other 80 to 90% of us, and I am hooked up to that sewer, that do not have a sump pump, that are having an increase in our bills of maybe 20% by this. It's also increasing the capital cost to the sewer commission because we're overtaxing some of our pumping stations when a heavy rain happens and the sump pumps are just pumping through this area. So that means the capital that we're all now sharing happens more often because of the stress to the system. So those are just two things that I think are important when the reports are being done that are stressed. We're not here, these are illegal connections. They've been illegal for a while. Are there any questions for either Bobby or Patrick? Patrick's done a tremendous amount of work on this. So
I
go ahead.
had a question really around the communication rather than the ordinance and the guidelines themselves. I mean, to what extent do you think that the residents of Darien understand that there's a state law, which precedes this? To what extent do you think they understand this is costing everybody in town? I forget what the delta is, $2 million that we're paying extra in addition to all the knock-on effects from, flooding where we shouldn't be having. In other words, I guess what I'm saying is if you just read the ordinance, it sounds, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be draconian, but it does come across as draconian. So I think it would behoove us to package this in such a way that we explain the rationale for having to do this in both legal as well as economic and other terms.
Sounds like we need a couple of whereas clauses.
Well,
no, actually, I'm not being like that. Sounds like facetious to me, Peter, because a whereas clause is something in a contract, and I'm saying I think you need to have a document that gets sent to the Darien Times and posted on the website, et cetera, and explain the whole rationale for this. Yeah. Otherwise, it's going to feel like a wooden hammer.
No. I mean? Listen, I get it. I thought you were just you were discussing the actual the resolution.
No. I'm talking about a communication vis-a-vis the citizens of the town as opposed to the ordinance, et cetera, which have obviously been worked out in with great care and in great detail.
I agree.
So maybe we need a cover letter that explains the situation, explains the work that's done.
Exactly.
That sort of like says, this is why we're doing it, to be part of the letter that's being sent out. Now, I know that they've sent out things in the past. I was speaking to Susan Cameron about it, and I guess for 5 years they've included this in our assessment bill. And, I'm pretty nerdy on things that go on in government, and I had to admit to her that I never read whatever document they put in my assessment. I just looked at what the price was and wrote a check. And quite honestly, I wrote one check because I didn't want to be bothered in April writing a second. So yes, that's a recommendation we can make to the commission of some type of marketing explaining.
Jack, if I may, yes, that suggestion's it's a good suggestion. It's been made by others as well. I think it's a great point. The commission, Craig and the others have said that they are going to give a great deal of thought to the communications that they're going to send out to be. But to your point, Jack, they can send it out. If people don't read it, that's another issue. The issue though has been going on, and the commission has been sending out these surveys and information requests now for, I think, 4 years. And in fact, that's one of my questions I have out to Craig. I don't know what the response rate is. I'll find out what that is, but it's been very low, which is what's prompted the need for this ordinance.
Well, and
I think Susan mentioned they may get 1 to 10 a year, if that many. So it's extremely low response rate.
Well, and human nature is such, nobody wants to disclose that, yes, by the way, I bought a house and I have an illegal sump pump connection and it's going to cost $10,000 to build a holding reservoir and dig up my lawn. So human nature is such that people are not going to offer up this information easily. And I'm cynically think a lot of people will lie. And they'll just say, yes, I've got a sump pump. No, it's not discharged into the sewer. And how are we going to catch those individuals if they decide to lie?
Okay, so I'm going to try and answer that, and Patrick can correct me. We're doing other tests that are going on that can determine, and there is a difference. If you voluntarily say, I have a sump pump, I may not even know where it's discharging because, I'll take Jim Cameron's little old lady. She may have no idea even how to get to it. So that we'll find out. But if you volunteer that, you have a minimum of 6 months that will be extended frequently if you're working with Public Works to find a solution. if you lie and the commission or public works finds out, they can actually tell who on the system, on the pumping stations have excess because it was already think that out of our 14 pumping stations, 3 have excessive volumes when it rains. So they pretty much know the areas that it's happening in. If the commission finds that you lied, then we're reverting back to Appendix C, Article 11, which already says that then you only have 30 days to fix it. And after 30 days, you get a written notice, and the daily fines can be up to a maximum of $100. So if you don't do anything
per day,
for half a year, you're up at $18,000, which is enough to sort of convince you that you should do that 10,000. Plus, it gets an interest rate, and they get to charge the same that we do for any fine that's allowed by state law, and that's currently at 18%. So there is a financial incentive for those that lie or misrepresent. I'm still believing that people will be honest with it because there's going to be some help coming, and there's multiple ways to do it. I've expressed mine, which is basically you provide some financial aid depending upon the financial need and the circumstances in that. We have the capacity of putting a lien on the house. And when the property title changes, the town gets paid back. We don't have to charge interest for it. We can do other things along that line. And in order to pay for that, they're talking about that the fines will pay for it. We don't need to do that. They have $1.7 million in their reserves now. And we could do, in speaking to Jen Chinesky, we would do a special appropriation from the reserve account into their operating account, and that could be the initial funding of whatever they have after 90 days. But they first have to find out what they have and how much it may cost to fix all these before you can even figure out what the need is. Now, usually the 1.7 million is used for extraordinary items like you had on Weed Beach, we had the sewer line break. But if they really needed a $500,000 amount, they could easily take it out of or $1 million for that matter, for something that went awry. They could take it out and then it would go from the sewer commission to the board of selectmen to the board of finance and back over to the RTM, where we would most probably bond that repair for $1 million, which would be repaid by the 5,400 people that are attached to the sewer line. So that's the finances. So that does make certain funds available over the longer term. Just saying. So we'll see if the commission adopts it.
Jack, I appreciate that explanation. I had a question in reading the regulations, and maybe Patrick or it could be Bobby, but when you get to the point where a homeowner is getting permits to do construction on their house, renovation, that whole section, I was puzzled that we didn't require the homeowner at that time to, clear up any sump pump issues as part of the final inspection of the house that the town is entitled to do when the renovation work is getting done. It just seemed to say, well, you just have to sign the statement again, rather than actually including it in the inspection. And I say that because when I renovated my house, I was required to take all my rain gutters and all the rainwater running off and run it into underground tanks to have it, disperse more slowly. and that was a requirement of my permits, and it was inspected. So I didn't understand why we didn't go that one step further and make it a requirement on any, new permits and renovations. Maybe there's
We
a good
can,
reason.
we can speak to the building inspector, but, Pierre, I'll
Wait,
tell you,
Jack, I'm asking them. I know, I want to hear what their reasoning was.
Well,
Okay.
Tara, I don't know what the checklist is when a building inspector comes through to give a final, before the CO is issued on a plumbing inspection, electrical inspection, all of that. I have to believe, though, that this is part of that checklist, but I don't know for certain. It's a great idea, and I'm sure that cross-departmental recommendations, I think, would be looked upon very favorably, given the scope of this problem.
I think we have to make the recommendation because I heard that they do not always do it. And I concur with you, Pierre, when we changed renovated our kitchen, we found out that every bedroom needs a fire alarm inside the bedroom, even though the halls had it all there. And before we got our COO, we had to put up fire detectors.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
the general practice has been, if you do renovation work, the town can require you to bring things up to code. And
Yep.
if this is the code, the town can require. But the language I read, and I'm not trying to open up the rewording or whatever, I've just puzzled because it wasn't very tight. And maybe that's because it is theoretically covered in the building permits or the zoning enforcement or whatever else.
And to be fair, even once the CO is issued, there's nothing to physically prevent, right, a homeowner from just saying, okay,
you can do all kinds of things
reroute
afterwards,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
And
So,
people do.
which is why the survey or the information request is likely to go out once a year.
Yeah.
And so people will have to recertify each year.
Per, to add to that, to address your question, part of this is because the regulations here are in their infancy stage. They are not something that are based on any state model guidelines because they don't exist for this subject matter. Because of that, the requirements that are being implemented through these regulations. I think first we got to remember jurisdiction. The Sewer Commission has purview over the sewer system. To what degree the Sewer Commission has authority to require you as a new homeowner to submit certification subject to a building code or a zoning regulation is, there's questions there. It's also if we are as the Sewer Commission, if the Sewer Commission is going to require these things, I do think we need to first remember that we're talking about the return of information, not necessarily the act of disconnecting itself, but the return of the compliance statement, which is unique. That aspect is unique specifically to Darien Sewer Commission regulations. So I think right now, out of abundance of caution, we're trying not to go too hard in the requirements we're imposing on other aspects of property ownership and transfers and town governance here, and just limiting it to what the Sewer Commission can do, and getting these statements out, getting them returned, giving them some degree of discretion.
Okay, so I can add that to my district's discussions of ways to make the town more efficient.
Doug, I'm going to ask you a question if you can unmute.
Thank you.
If you don't mind. Doug, you're doing some real estate now? Doug Bonacci. Oh, you're not hearing me.
Yeah.
I think that agents have to indicate when they're selling a house, whether or not there's a sump pump. Now, not everybody does it, but I believe that's part of the disclosure that you're supposed to give to a potential buyer. Bobby, you're nodding your head, so you have more knowledge on that than I do.
I was going to say the seller has to disclose it, if anything,
right?
Not the real estate agent. They don't take any liability.
Yes, it's part of the disclosure statement. I can't tell you offhand, what specific code provision would require it, but I know that from doing closings in Fairfield County, that's always there. So yeah, you typically disclose its existence. Again, you can't guarantee people are telling the truth, but But a lot of this goes back to these set of regulations are not necessarily about stopping the discharge. We already have a regulation that does that. This is about returning the statements to get information.
Yeah.
So if you have a sump pump and you don't know where it's pumping, do you have to call a plumber and they'll tell you where the discharge is going?
No.
Public Works, I believe. Patrick, can you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of methods to figure out where it's going, whether it's going into the sewer, where it's headed. There are smoke techniques, there are dye techniques, there are a number of techniques that the sewer commission or a plumber can use to figure out where the water's flowing to.
Like I live on Buttonwood Lane, and it was a couple of years ago they actually did those tests, and that it shot water up our toilets, and if you didn't shut your toilet seat, the whole bathroom was soaking wet, and some smoke came out. Why did they do that for Buttonwood Lane, but they haven't done that townwide?
I haven't heard of that test. Frankly, I'm glad I haven't experienced that yet, but I have no.
It wasn't very
I don't know
pleasant.
about that.
Charles, I think they are doing that test. So that's one of the ways that if you have misrepresented your, whether or not you have a sump pump, the smoke test actually does tell it, because they'll send smoke up, I don't know how, up the sewer line. And if it's coming out of the vent for where the bathroom and other things do, and they see smoke coming out, then they know you're hooked up to the sewer line. How the mechanics work on that or anything else, I have no clue. But I know that that's one of the tests.
Yeah, the testing for a sump pump is not as straightforward. It's much more complicated and not as, I mean, it's everybody's got their own setup, different different topography, everything is different. So that what was just described is just testing to see whether or not you have a septic system or you're hooked up to the sewer system. Whether or not you have a sump pump or downspouts that are discharging into the sanitary sewer system, that's not quite as straightforward. But there is technology under development, I've heard, although we haven't been deploying it, where using cameras and that sort of thing through the main through the main arteries, we can see it's much more expensive. We're trying not to get to that point where we drop cameras in and we can see where the clean water is coming from, after a rainstorm. So this is,
if we go ahead with this,
this is step one.
If we go ahead with this ordinance and I get this letter saying, do you have a sump pump and are your downspouts, what am I supposed to do with it? How do I find out? Who do I go to find out what the answer is? I know I don't have a sump pump, but I don't know where my downspouts are draining to.
If
you would need to hire, you would need to bring in a professional.
Or you
So we're requiring every household in Darien to call in a professional to answer this order.
I'm going to take, there's something you can do first. One of the things you can do is contact Public Works, and they will work with you. That's a commitment that Ed has made. So that's part of the reason why the 6 months, maybe 12 months, depending upon what work, and they're going to be bringing in the engineers or whatever else they need to do some analysis, because they might be able to do it a lot more simply and without incurring a cost to the homeowner. The goal isn't to incur cost. I mean, it's to find information. Once we have information, to figure out, if your sump pump is doing the proper discharge or not. And then if it's doing an illicit discharge, whether not a sump pump or, as you're saying, drain spouts, Public Works is going to work with you. They're going to help you investigate and other things like that, with you giving permission make an appointment, give permission, they'll look at it, they'll figure out what tests they need to do. Because we don't need everybody in town paying $1,000 for somebody to figure it out for them. Besides the fact that that would create a crush on everybody who's trying to do it, I believe Public Works will be working with people on that. So that's the first call you make if you don't know what's going on.
Hey, can I just clarify for Charles? This is about sump pumps. It's not about your downspouts. I just used that as an example, right? It's a separate issue.
But still, if you're not sure, you call Public Works first and let them work with you. So we're not asking everybody to go out and do their own research one way or another. They might go over there and say, don't worry about it. We can trace where your downspouts are going. So are there any other questions, or are we ready to vote on this again? Okay. So I need somebody to move the motion to accept the ordinance, which I did send out. Who's going to move it?
So moved.
I have Pierre moving, and I have Beth seconding. Okay. All those in favor of the ordinance, raise your hand. I'm trying to count. People are moving around, so wait. Those who yay. Those who are not in favor, raise your hand. Those who are abstaining, raise your hand. Okay. Where's Charles? I know you're here someplace. There you are. Yeah. I will be communicating to make sure that I am also explaining why you voted against it in our report.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. The next thing before Bobby, I don't think we need you, but Patrick, you might want to stay around because the next thing we're going to is the addition of the 1.705 to bring two existing prior resolutions on the sewer. We did the first one, I believe, in 20. We did another one in 24, increasing. These are primarily to continue the I&I work and some of the other work that's being done in the sewer system. The 1.7 and change will increase from the approximately 4.7 million and bring it up to 6.402,800. The debt, which is issued by the town, is repaid by those who are hooked up to the sewers. So when they issue it, not affecting anybody's real estate mill rate. This is solely by those who have a connection to the sewer system, the 5,400. Is there anything else you want to add on that, Patrick? The 1.7?
Just that this is a continuation of the program that was started back 5-6 years ago. And this is primarily for investigation. This is where they're actually dropping the cameras in and cleaning the main arteries so that they can see where there's infiltrating water through cracks, and where they identify that there are cracks and breaches in the system. They identify that as either that line either has to be it has to be either replaced or relined, which is a very interesting process to reline the. So this is primarily for engineering services. It's not totally for repair, but Jack, I think you said earlier, we're about 2/3 complete with this program so far. And this is, again, just limited to sewer users. It's not Darien taxpayers.
Right. Any questions for Patrick or myself on this? Nope. Okay, are we ready to move? I have somebody to move it. I
I'll move
have
it.
Charles moving. And I need a second. I'll take Doug. All in favor, raise your hand. Oh, okay, I didn't see, so that's unanimous. Let me just count how many people are still here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so that's unanimous for 10-0. Patrick, thank you so much. You can hang around for the rest of our meeting, but you can also go since you've been talking sump pumps for quite some time.
Thank you, Patrick. I know it's
Thank you.
very tough.
Thanks, everyone. No, it's all fine. Thanks.
Okay. Our next item is the Darien Foundation is donating a new crime lab that's updating and replacing certain of the equipment that we have. There's some new equipment that they're adding. The total estimated cost is about $72,000. Because that's above 12,500, the RTM needs to approve it. And therefore, it's going to us. The primary on this will be public health and safety. We're just going to have a very nice report. I sent out the capital plan for it. The annual maintenance of this incremental is about $550 a year plus $800, but we're already paying that ongoing maintenance service contract. They also provided a plan of what the lifespan is for this. There are some new items here. Generally, if we approve, our committee will have the report there. Hopefully, public health and safety will give the details because they'll be primary on this. And, I'm assuming that we're going to pass it. And our report will be, thank you, Violet, for your wonderful report. Thank you for the Darien Foundation for your generosity. And the RTM Finance and Budget voted X. And so we're not going to have to get into much detail. Our report will have it to cover things that they might not have covered. But other than that, is there any questions on that? Okay, seeing none. I need somebody to move the motion for the gift. I have Bill. And I need a second.
Second.
I'm going to do Peter, since that way we have everyone different doing each one of these things. All those in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimous. I like those votes. One of the things that I wanted to cover, and it's something that we'll probably hear more about in the next 2 weeks, but Post 53 has requested $360,000 without question, and I do disclose this because it's important. My daughter was vice president of Post, and as a parent, I worked for 4 years setting up different things there. And so I am very much in favor of the excellent work that Post does. They have some financial needs. There are still some questions that need to be responded to. From my perspective, and Pierre was at the meeting when they were discussing it, this isn't saying that the town shouldn't provide any funds at this time, but it's not as clean because they have the Friends of Post 53 and then they have Post 53. And there doesn't seem to be as clear a delineation as there is between the library and the Friends of the Library. And I think that there's certain things that the Board of Finance members are going to be asking for based upon some conversations I've had, to just make sure that we understand what the goals are, what's going to be done, what is this generating, as opposed to just making a payment and walking away. So it's not to say that we're not supporting Post, and without question, if Post didn't exist and we had to go outside, the town would have a much higher price. But the question is, we're still getting into an ongoing business relationship with them, where we have to understand what we're paying for, what the increases are, and what are the goals that we're expecting to get back by doing this. So if you haven't read all the documents there, I'm just putting everybody on notice. Please do, and come back with any questions you might have. Pierre, feel free to add to that. I know we have a slight difference.
We're coming at it from just different directions. It was a very good first presentation of the Post 53 representatives. This is their first time coming to town asking for direct support of the budget. So kind of no different than how the town supports the library, but Post 53 hasn't needed to do that in the past. So, the first question that came to mind, certainly me, and they addressed it, it's because the demand for their services has really gone up almost exponentially, but it's gone up a lot. And Jack certainly talked to that, but if you read the numbers and you look at it, they're making a lot of calls. They don't even have enough vehicles really to cover it if one of their vehicles is down. So then they have to go to Stamford or Norwalk and get assistance from there, which is part of their arrangement. So, what I was expressing to Jack after the meeting is that this is one of those circumstances where we look at the growth in town, for better or worse. Some people are a little unhappy about it. Others are very happy. It has grown our grand list, which has grown our revenue line, right? But that same growth has, taken advantage of the so-called free services we have in town from places like Post 53. And what struck me, and I don't know if this is an exact analytical view, but it just struck me that, those revenues are coming into town, and the town has sort of viewed that as increasing its tax base, but it ignored the fact that it's putting pressure on services like Post 53 and, in fact, the fire department and some of the others, where we have this hybrid of volunteers, donor-based, and then the town contributing. And Post is now just finally falling into line. You can, and Jack has made good arguments, you can argue that why they're doing it, how they're doing it, that I think is what the Board of Finance and us and others are really going to drill down. But I think that the general reason for why they finally had to come forward, in my sort of initial humble opinion, has to do with this growth. And it has to do with the fact that we don't get a bigger grant list with more people, more services, and not have to pay for it somehow. And the last thing I'll just point out is, they mentioned, which was, I don't know, 10 years ago or whatever, you go back and look at what kind of senior housing was available in town, there weren't very many options. If you now look at the number of assisted living facilities in town, and then the number of calls that are going out to that for Post 53, that's where it's coming from, right? And those organizations are not paying for their residents because Post 53 gives free transport to Darien residents, including those facilities. So there's some interesting dynamics in all this. It's not a simple, straightforward question. So I'll just stop there. That was kind of my initial takeaway.
I will tell you, and again, being a supporter of Post, I do understand that they need some financial aid. It's just tightening up how the town is giving it and getting them in line similar to the library so that we understand what the Friends are doing. I like little things. The Friends at the library pay for capital. My interpretation, and we don't have the real numbers, but the Friends of Post have a $9 to $10 million endowment that has grown well over the last couple of years, and they've been covering the shortfalls of the post operation over those years, and it is significant, but it's not as significant as what they've grown. I also feel that in the library, the Friends pay for the capital, other than if something is given as a gift, and it goes to the library instead of the Friends. But the capital is predominantly done by the Friends, and that discussion isn't clear because it appears that the Post is looking to pay for ambulances. And I will tell you, back in 2002, all the ambulances were donated by one of the automotive dealers in town. I'm not identifying which one. They don't do that anymore. And the buses now cost about $350,000, which is quite a big expense based upon the revenues that they're getting in from the Tilly Fond Memorial Day, the Ghost House, the Halloween House, and a couple other events that they run, besides just outright donations. So they have to work on their donations, but I think part of where some of us in town are asking is just better define what's the Friends responsible for, what Post is responsible for, so we know what's going on. Other than that, I fully agree with what Per is saying. The amount of traffic is up significantly of what they're doing. If their buses are 10 years old, which is far too old, they don't seem to have a formal replacement schedule, which they may have had at some time before. And so it's sort of getting all those ducks in a row to say, yeah, we'll give you money, but we need X, Y, and Z also there so that we make sure that they're continuing organization in what they're doing with proper financial. And they brought in, I believe, Harvard Business that works with nonprofits to examine their records and finances, I believe last year, if I'm not mistaken, and they're looking to implement some of those. So it's a work in progress, but we'll have to see where first the Board of Finance is coming out on that. Where'd Peter go? Are there any other questions? I mean, I'm not saying yes or no. I just want us to become aware. Peter, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a nice chat with Jenny Schwartz about this. And in some ways, I don't want to go. She echoed a lot of the same concerns and talked about if we're putting taxpayer money into their coffers, there needs to be some degree of institutional accountability going forward, the same way the library does. And she used the same analogy with the library, and as Per said, I think there are more people using their services, and if that growth needs to be supported, that's great. But then again, we need to make sure that taxpayer money is being used appropriately.
And that's one of the challenges that are here. I'm personally in favor if for any reason this is denied, but it's going to take 6 months to get things together, that we can possibly, and I'm not saying it's going to be denied, but if for any case it is because of those things, we put in a lot of effort from the town and them to bring it up, and in 6 months we can make a special appropriation. to handle that because more than anything else, I think a lot of us appreciate their services. So, and I'm very loyal to them. So,
I just want to
any
make
other question?
one comment.
Sure.
These
You
are
make two.
yeah. So these are volunteers, responding to 911 calls, and with what they do is time is myocardium, time is cerebral perfusion. But I appreciate what Pierre said. We're taxing our system with adding more people to our community. I feel like maybe some of these community centers also need to kind of shoulder some of that cost, because if we're just going to shoulder it all ourselves, I think that'll be difficult and we're going to overwhelm the infrastructure.
Well, I will also add, because they have a nuance that happened from Walter Casey years ago, that there was a challenge, even though quite honestly, Post gets you to one of the two hospitals in about 6 minutes, which is phenomenal time from when they are on call to getting a patient out. They meet every one of the metrics at a very high level compared to both town run and private run ambulances. If there's certain conditions, the biggest one is a heart attack, and you see the EMS from Stanford going there, then usually they're doing the transport, and it's Post that bills for Stanford, for the Stanford EMS to collect, which is confusing to some because honestly, everybody thinks it's free. But there are times where we need a paramedic as opposed to just an EMT. And so that determination is made very early on. And in most of these calls, like Pierre was talking about the seniors, the other person who is showing up is that there's a police officer also there at all times. So, and the dispatchers all talk to each other. But yes, that's part of it. And, we'll eventually bring them over. I've requested, and we'll get them into one of our meetings just to present some of the documentation so that our committee has a better understanding of how they work now, because mine is a little bit outdated 20 years ago. But I will tell you, and this just shows my prejudice towards them. My daughter has reacted once in the New Canaan Dog Park and once in the Metro at DC to somebody who was having a seizure, and she was joined with a nurse waiting for the ambulance to come, and the nurse and she still remembered all the things she had to do to stabilize that individual until the paramedics came in the Metro. So they do an excellent job training, and this stays with these kids as adults. So that's just
good to know.
Yeah, it's my own prejudice towards that organization.
Right.
So, and I'm very honest about it. So, all right. With that, the only two other things I wanted to mention is that I had originally said that the grand list grew by 1.5%, 1.56, and it did grow. However, there are challenges to the valuations and the charges, and the grand list has reduced from about 1.5 to just a slight bit over 1. So if we were anticipating 2.7, the incremental income is about 1.8. If you look at that financials that I sent out, I'm going to get another set that's more up to date. I have an old Excel that doesn't accept some of the formulas that they have. So you need at least a 22 version of Excel. But I'll get both the stated copy and the other. This Tuesday, they're speaking to the library. I'm sure they'll have other discussion. The following Tuesday, which is, I believe, the 7th, that will be the final budget vote, which for those who are listening to me talk to Beth earlier in this meeting, I will be at the Board of Finance meeting and not at my district's meeting because of that. But my district's more than capable of handling it after looking what Pierce District did. Set up a little competition between districts.
Hey, Jack, can you go back to that switch from 1.5 to 1?
Yeah.
That's a big delta. Is that like one or two of the large properties? Like, it doesn't strike me as dozens and dozens of people complaining.
I don't know exactly what it is. I mean, I just was speaking to Josh Kaufman, and I was looking at one of the things, and some of them were sizable. So, but I haven't had the opportunity to really delve into, what went through the Board of Appeals and what they decided. So,
I was just, I mean,
yeah,
you mentioned it as like, that's a big delta. I thought you were going to go 1.5 to 1.4.
yeah, I thought it was a big delta as well.
Okay.
So, but we will have a better understanding of that. There's a challenge going on here. If you looked at those sheets that I sent out, which is labeled the JD seats, so Josh knows that I have all the formulas calculated with the hard numbers. We're over 6 with everything that's going on with an increase in the mill rate. Now, they still haven't determined what increments they're doing on revenue, so they may be adjusting the investment income. There's other incomes they can look at. They did move $1 million of stuff from the Board of Ed budget to the HHR project. I have some problems with it, and I've asked certain questions and I haven't gotten answers yet back of whether or not they qualify for the grants. If they qualify for the grants, then that's good. But anything we move into a building project, the general construction manager now gets another 4% of whatever that movement was. So if we're moving over $1 million, we're now paying $40,000 to the construction manager for them to manage what we just moved over. And 3 of them are paving some parking lots and doing some gymnasium floors. Now, if we're getting 12% back from the state, then that's good because we're actually making money on that. But I haven't gotten an answer as to whether or not that's going on. They also haven't decided how much is coming out of the general fund to pay down capital. And last year we did $3 million. I'm anticipating at least $2 million this year. So because we're not making excess money on the investment income, and in fact, we may not even equal the investment income that the Board of Finance increased last year. So those are some of the numbers that will be discussed. The anticipation is someplace, I'm going to say about between 4.8 to 5.2 will be our mill rate increase. And, part of it is that, we're doing a lot of investment, and at the end of the day, you got to pay those loans back. I mean, it's you can't just keep on buying things on credit cards and then thinking that you don't have to pay it back. So that's part of it that's going on. So that just about brings me up to date. And are there any other questions or anything? We're not going to do minutes tonight. Any other questions on budget or anything else? If there are, please send me the questions. I'll forward them to Jim Palin or to the appropriate party and get answers for us. Seeing none, then I'll take a motion to adjourn. That one always has the fastest response. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Doug, you can go to your other meeting now, which I know you've been with. Thank you for joining us, Doug. I really do appreciate it.